Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Cesotris, and this week, even though it's August, I still feel like August is sort of pre-September, and September is basically October, so we're starting spooky season early, and today I'm going to be talking about Stephen King. So Stephen King's one of those authors who I've had on my radar for a really long time, and I have read some of his stuff, but I feel like I keep drifting away. I don't know what's going on. But so this video is going to be a little bit different. Instead of just me talking about why you should read this author, I'm going to be reaching out to you guys to tell me what your favorite book by this author is and what books I should read. I kind of got into Stephen King a little bit later than everyone else. I think everyone else was my age was reading it in like junior high. They probably shouldn't have, but you know, that's what happens. And I started reading his work in college, and it's actually because of a classmate that I had. It was like my first semester of college. I was brand new. I didn't know anybody. And there was this kid in this class with me. It was one of my literature classes. And he was a huge Stephen King fan. He kept talking about The Dark Tower and how it was this like amazing fantasy series and that it connected to all of his other works. And that I should read him because like it all connects together. And I love me a multiverse, or like a shared universe of any kind. And so I was like, great, this sounds fun. Okay. Because in my brain, I was always like, I always thought that he was like scary, but like pointlessly scary, like just trashy scary, if that makes sense. Like it was just kind of like meaningless kind of stuff. But as a teenager, I was really into Michael Crichton and Tom Clancy. So I was reading kind of, you know, adult thriller stuff anyway. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it a go. So I started with The Dark Tower, which looking back, I probably shouldn't have, because that's like, you read that after you've read all the other stuff and then you kind of know what's going on. But I started with The Dark Tower. And I really enjoyed it. It was kind of a taste of everything that he does, and it was a look at how his writing style changed over his career, because he started writing the first book really early, I think when he was like 17. The version I read was kind of the edited version that he put out later. But it was really cool to see kind of all the different genres that he did, because it was fantasy and it was horror and it was thriller, lots of character stuff. It was just a whole huge thing. At that point, there was only 7 Dark Tower books. I know there's an 8th one now, which I haven't read yet. So one of these days, once I've read all of his other stuff, I'm going to go back and do another reread of that series with the other book added in where it's supposed to go. And we'll see how that goes. But it's funny, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was great, and I didn't get all of the references to his other books, except for a few which were kind of obvious, but for the most part, I thought it was great. And I was like, I love this guy's writing style, and I got really into his stuff. And I read The Shining next. No, I didn't. I read Salem's Lot next. And it's funny, I love vampires, and it's kind of a small town take on Dracula, but I could not tell you anything about the plot of that book. It's like after I read it, I must not have been paying attention, but that book just escaped my brain completely. It's almost as if I've never read it in my whole life, but I know I did read it. I remember his foreword to the book more than the book itself. So I know that book is well regarded, so I need to go back and actually like read it and like focus on it, because I was a teenager at the time, and I was a teenager at the time, and I wasn't paying attention. I had a really bad habit of skimming through books when I was reading it, so that's my own fault that I didn't get it. After that, I read The Shining, and The Shining was great. I really, really loved that. I'd seen the movie already and really loved it. Haunted hotel, spooky, slow burn, very psychological. It was extremely my jam, and I loved it so much. But I have not read the sequel. And so coming up, when I finish my current read, the next thing I'm going to read is The Shining and Dr. Sleep to get kind of back into that. But after that, I read It. And this is one of my favorite books of all time ever. Now, when I first read this, I had a kind of a beat up hardcover version with like the first, I don't think it was a first edition or anything, but it was a really beat up hardcover that I got from a used bookstore. and it was very ungainly. Like, it's one of those ones that, like, it looks good on a shelf, but it's not a super practical edition because it's like this big and it's super thick, and like reading it, you had to read it like this. It was like reading, you know, the Bible. It was huge. But I really, really loved it. And then I got it on audiobook, and that's the version that I've read kind of the most because the audiobook's great. But I since have found this at another used bookstore. But paperback copy, much easier to hold. This book is amazing. This is everything I've ever wanted in a scary book. It's perfect. And I think my favorite thing about Stephen King is that he kind of went to the same school of exposition as like Victor Hugo, where like every time you meet a new character, you get like 100 pages on that character's backstory, where they came from, what their family was. It's very much in that kind of small town thing where everyone knows everyone, and so he makes sure that you know everyone in this town and everyone's backstory and all the drama and everything. And this book just completely captivated me, and I loved it so much. And I think my favorite thing, well, another favorite thing, there's lots of favorite things, is that the scariest monsters in this book are the humans. Like, there's two people specifically. There's Beverly's husband, who's terrifying, and he's just a guy. He's just an awful, abusive guy, but he's terrifying. And then like that creepy kid, you know, the one I'm talking about, just chills. But like, you know, the you know, undead arcane horror from space, you know, he's fine. But, you know, people are scary. But and that's one thing that I really liked, is like the evil, unknowable cosmic horror sort of plays on the evil that people already do to each other, and that's kind of what makes him the most scary, is he kind of amplifies other people's awful tendencies, and so he uses people's fears against them. And one of those fears for some people is like these awful people, or the things that awful people do kind of help to wake this thing up whenever it awakens every so often. There's a lot of lore in this, but it's just wonderful. And I love the huge cosmic scope at the end when you finally kind of learn to understand what it is, and all the stuff that's going on, the big confrontation, the whole thing with like the turtle and the structure of the universe, which ties into the Dark Tower stuff, which, you know, the Dark Tower is in the middle of this kind of cosmic multiverse, and each of the kind of beams is sort of presided over by a guardian, and one of the guardians is the turtle, who kind of helps the heroes overcome the creature, this one. But so I read this one and I absolutely loved it, and I couldn't get enough. And then for whatever reason, I hit a couple walls when I was reading other stuff, because after this one I read Dreamcatcher, or I started to read Dreamcatcher, and because it's set in Derry also, so it's kind of, you know, a familiar setting, and so I was like, oh, I want to do that. And I don't know what it was. I think it was just, there was other stuff going on. I think this is shortly before I was moving back home to Canada, and so there was just a lot of, my head was elsewhere and I couldn't focus. And so I started, I got maybe 50 pages in, and I was just like, you know what, I'm not focusing, I can't follow this, I'll read it at a later time. And then when I moved, I had to get rid of a ton of books because I didn't have a lot of space, and so that one got donated, because I don't know, in my brain I thought, you know, I'm never going to get to this. And I also donated my massive It hardcover, which I kind of am sad about, but that's one of those books that, like, it's only for sitting on your shelf and looking impressive. And, you know, as I've gotten older, I now want books on the shelf that I can read and that I want to read. Having just books on the shelf just for show and not books that you actually want to read kind of feels like it defeats the purpose, and that's just kind of pointless. So I don't have that hardcover anymore, but someone in a small town in the US found that book at a used bookstore and thought, oh my God, and they got it, and it made their day better. And so now I have a better copy. So it's fine. Don't be sad. But I just couldn't get into Dreamcatcher for whatever reason. And I know some people say it's not his best, but I liked the concept, and I do want to read that one again. So I'll give it another go. Maybe I'll get it as an ebook, because that's another long book, and ebooks are easier. And then the other one was The Stand. This is kind of considered one of his best books ever, and it's another huge one. This one, it doesn't even look that big, but it's like the pages are teeny tiny and thin, so it's a massive book. And this is another one. I read this shortly after the move, and I couldn't focus. And this was in 2018, so this was like 2 years before COVID stuff. So it wasn't that. But for some reason, I couldn't focus. And I said, you know what, I'm going to have to put this down, and I'm going to have to come back to it later. And the version that I was reading at the time was a different paperback from this one. And that one ended up getting donated also. And so I got this again, because I'm a chaotic person when it comes to used books. I'll read something and be like, this isn't doing it for me. And so I'll impulsively donate it to the used bookstore. And then later on, I'm like, I really do want to read that. So then I have to get it again. And that's such a waste of money. So don't be like me and just hoard everything all the time. And eventually you'll want to read it. So yeah, hoarding is good, actually. So I do want to read this one eventually. And I think we're far enough away from the chaos of the pre-vaccine COVID era, which was really scary, where, this would have been a little too much. And so we're kind of far enough away, and this is, evil pandemic and stuff. But I do want to read this one, and this one is on my list. I'm going to try to get to it this year, maybe. And another one that I do want to read, because I've just heard really good things about that, is Fairy Tale. This one's a fantasy, I think. Yes, it's a fantasy. Kind of a portal fantasy. And I've always been curious to see how he handles that kind of genre, because he did really good things with The Dark Tower, and he handles fantasy really well. So I was like, okay, I want to give this a go and see how that goes. But that's kind of what I have now, and I do want to read more of his stuff. So if you have read his stuff, if you're a huge fan, what were your favorite books? What were the ones that leaped out and attacked you? And, most of my favorite stuff is the fantasy horror stuff, the supernatural stuff. But I know he's done slashery things and psychological horror. So if you've read his other stuff, I want to know what it is that you love about it. What's your favorite book of his? The book that everyone in the whole world should read. I know he has a huge bibliography, and I've scrolled through it all, and it's a little overwhelming. So I do definitely want to get back into his work, because I think I'm in a place now where I have a good reading routine, and there's no upheaval happening, and the world isn't falling apart right now. So I think I can, dig into these big, huge books and have a good time. So with that said, I guess that's everything. This was kind of a chaotic video. I had written out a bullet point list of all my points that I wanted to make, and I was going to talk about what he does well and my favorite things about his characters and everything. And it just became too much me pretending to be an expert on this author when I've really only read a tiny bit of his stuff. So I'm really not an expert in any way. I've read, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, I've read 9 of his books, and 7 of those were the original Dark Tower series, which is kind of one story. So I really haven't read a ton of his stuff. So I didn't want to set myself up as this expert on Stephen King, and these are my rankings, and this is why you should read him, because that would be really presumptuous, because I really haven't read a lot of his stuff. But I do want to read more of it, because I love his writing style. I love the way he does character. I love the way he rambles on and on about backstory and flashbacks. I know some people that's not really their thing, but I love Victor Hugo, and he does that too. So I'm just programmed to like that kind of storytelling. And I love that he's not afraid to be weird. In The Dark Tower, there's one part where the characters have this Wizard of Oz moment where they all get little ruby slippers. Even their little creature who's with them, he gets little ruby slippers on his feet, and it's so cute. And there's this Emerald City kind of thing, and it's such a bizarre moment, and it really shouldn't work, but it does. It fits into this sort of multiverse traversing thing, and it pays homage to kind of the quest story that they're all kind of on. Like the whole Dark Tower thing is more about stories than it is a story itself. Like it's very meta, and having this weird like Wizard of Oz moment was a gamble, but it worked, and it you know it's great. And I know some people have issues with his like climaxes at the end of his books, because sometimes it's so slow burn that when everything happens, it either is disappointing or it can't answer every question. And honestly, I don't mind that. I think it's fine because you're in it for the characters anyway. That's what he does well. He writes really great characters, and the world is unknowable, and a lot of these kind of fantasy supernatural things that happen, sometimes you can't fully comprehend them, and so it's all about just you survive as best you can and then you move on. And I really love that. So tell me about your Stephen King obsessions. I'm really excited to get back into his work and become a crazed fanboy myself. So with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.